tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Welcome. And the cattle markets had a good run of it last week. We'll pick up on that and some other market matters with our guest out of Denver, where he is the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb. Very impressive showing on the cattle trades, cash and futures last week, Jim, and something that folks had not totally anticipated.
We really did not anticipate this, Eric. As you said, beef production last week was up 4.3% on the weekly data according to USDA, and total red meat production was up over 3% year over year. So quite a bit of product moving through the system, but packers needed animals to process, and we certainly got a stronger fed cattle market, over 129 trade. The futures over 130 for the first time on this February contract since it's been available. Feeder cattle markets were stronger too, so it's a bit of a pleasant surprise. The supply of animals seems to be still rather tight in the short term, and that supported the marketplace. The wholesale beef cutout wasn't really changed week over week, but we need to look back to last year, and we're up $20 per hundredweight, or over 10% year over year in the wholesale beef market, and that's certainly underpinning the live animal marketplace.
But again, your suggestion is that the last week's strength was largely on the back of supply concerns.
The very short-term supply concerns and packers needing animals in that environment. We still have a lot of featuring of beef going on in the marketplace and good movement through the market channels.
Jim, there has been some discussion in the industry about the larger placement numbers we've seen in feedlots in recent months and what implications those might bring to bear. Those worries were apparently not reflected last week.
Well, they weren't really reflected week over week, but if we look at the futures market overall, Eric, we have a 130 February contract and we have a 115 and change August contract. So we have a fully $15 per hundredweight rollback in the fed steer marketplace. That may not be quite enough to reflect the large placements against, let's say, the early June through early August time frame. We have placed a lot of animals, and so that the dynamic in the marketplace, I think, is reflected in the futures market, but we continue to place a lot of animals because of drought.
And that's something that could persist for a while as we continue to hear these repeated long-term outlooks that say that the dry weather, if not drought, will be with us for a while.
And it has been so far. I think it's already had some market impacts as we look at the number of cows that have come to the marketplace, mostly open cows, but they probably have come earlier than anticipated in 2018. And the placements seem to be remaining large based on our pre-report estimates going into this Friday's Cattle on Feed report.
And we want to bring up that cull cow market in further detail in a second here. But you have some thoughts ahead of the Cattle on Feed report as to what those numbers might tell us, Jim?
And I think it's a tale of dry conditions and the Southern Plains being the major part of the story in placements. We have placements up year over year 1% for the month of January. That does not sound like a lot, but a year ago we placed a lot of animals in January because we slowed them down and we kind of delayed them into feed yards. Well, we're pulling them in early this year. And certainly the drought conditions in the Southern Plains, our members across Texas, Oklahoma, especially into New Mexico, have said that the wheat pasture has turned to a point where a lot of cattle were forced to be placed into feed yards in the month of January. In fact, the Southern Plains numbers could come in surprisingly large, and we're comparing again against a number that was big last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if that placement number comes in even a little bit bigger, adding to this story about placements and the impact on fed cattle prices down the road. Marketings were up fully 6% year over year, Eric. We did have one more slaughter day, and so that's up 1.4% on a good marketing number last year. We're not really backing up animals, but we're certainly placing a lot of animals into feed yards. And that'll leave us an on-feed inventory up about 7%, maybe 7.5% year over year. That's a little bit smaller percent increase than we had last month, but that's still a lot of cattle to work through. And again, the concern is the time frame that those animals come out of feed yards, certainly targeted to the summer months. And that's the time where this fed cattle market and the feeder cattle markets will come together. we've had a lot of talk about feeder cattle supplies outside of feed yards being small. And this report will certainly add to that debate. But we need to remember they're already in feed yards. And so it's a supply story and a demand story. And the demand story is what's going to be the demand for feeder cattle, especially if we have dry conditions and we're pushing animals into the marketplace. And if cattle feeders are looking at lower prices significantly by the summertime. So, just looking at the supply of animals outside of feed yards is not quite enough. And we look for lower prices into the summertime for fed cattle. And that may take a little bit of steam out of this feeder cattle market also, especially in this kind of June, July, August time frame.
So as far as that cattle on feed report, need to, again, keep in mind that a number of cattle are being pulled forward, but there may be not a red flag, but a caution flag associated with those numbers as well.
I think it's a cautionary flag. Again, we'll look at the weight breakdown in the placements. Many of these will be lighter weight animals, but they will move through the marketing chain quicker than if they were staying on wheat pasture.
Back to the dry weather and the drought, flat out, in many quarters in the Central Plains, parts of Kansas included. The sell-off of cows because of lack of sufficient grazing resources and so forth. What do you see in the cull cow market and what might be ahead, Jim?
Well, we've seen a cull cow market that has been weaker than anticipated. In fact, the month of January was below December's in the Southern Plains cull cow prices. But last week we saw a pretty good uptick, and what we think has happened here is we have increased number of beef cows coming to slaughter, and that's been up year-to-date 12% year-over-year. Now, those are obviously open cows, Eric, but people are making some decisions, and maybe they were going to take those cull cows a little bit longer on wheat pasture or inexpensive forage, which has kind of evaporated here in many areas. Also, we've had on top of that a 3% year-over-year increase in dairy cow slaughter due to low milk prices. So we're up year-to-date 7% on cow slaughter. That is, maybe will slow down a little bit. This last week we did see in the Southern Plains about $4 per hundredweight higher cull cow market than we did the prior week. And there's a strong seasonal pattern, Eric, where we start to pull up cull cow prices, especially as the fed cattle market gets stronger. So, we are seeing some uptick in cull cow prices, but from a very low base. And as we look ahead, the drought conditions and also the dairy cow slaughter levels due to low milk prices probably keep these cull cow slaughter rates above a year ago for several more weeks and maybe longer. So that's a concern for those producers that have still got some open cows, or there may be, as we get into calving season, find some open cows. How do we market those animals? And we probably have to put a sharp pencil to that, and especially giving our forage supplies, looking at selling those animals earlier rather than later. And so we're going to get an opportunity here in the next few weeks to see these cull cow prices probably work a little bit higher, but again, not as much higher as we often do due to the larger supplies coming into the marketing system.
So some signals that you producers who anticipate culling some females need to keep on top of anyway as we move into the weeks and months ahead. So, Jim, we saw the fed cattle trade, cash trade, bump up as much as $4. Futures on both the fed and feeder sides had a good run of it last week. What's the ceiling for this market relative near term?
Well, the ceiling's always hard to call, Eric. This is a market that's had some extra support due to the near-term needs of packers, and we've had rather tight cattle supplies and some very cold weather across especially the Midwestern cattle feeding areas of eastern Nebraska, Iowa, southern Minnesota that has really capped, growth rates, slaughter weights, etc. But this is a market that has the potential, given the supply and how we placed animals, to peak here in the first quarter of the year and not so much in the second quarter or certainly late in the second quarter of the year. So we probably have pulled our market peak a little bit earlier. This is not a market that can't go up a little bit more, but the wholesale beef market doesn't seem to want to give us a lot more. Some of this increase has been really a narrowing of packer margins. So I think we're a little bit pleasantly surprised here, and in some cases we don't want to slow down our marketing rates, or if we're selling cull cows, et cetera, we need to maybe look at that with a sharp pencil.
Very well. We always appreciate your comments and insight, Jim. Many thanks. We will catch up with you in a few weeks once more.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
He's the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. To remind you once more, that project is co-sponsored by K-State and numerous other land-grant universities. That's Jim Robb with this week's Cattle Market Commentary. By the way, check out the center's website for loads of good information of interest to you cattle producers at lmic.info. That's lmic.info. We'll be back in a few moments with a feature from that Kansas cattle drive, which took place in Reno County over the weekend. That's next here on the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and now for you a feature from the third annual Kansas Cattle Drive that took place this past weekend in Buhler. K-State Research and Extension, a co-sponsor, along with the Reno County Cattlemen's Association. Among the many speakers at this excellent event was an individual who is very well familiar with Kansas State University, and he was raised on a well-known ranch in Barber County, south central Kansas. Graduated summa cum laude from K-State in 1980 and went on to a number of pursuits in the animal sciences education field, among those being the livestock judging coach at Colorado State University for 10 years, where his teams had quite a run, reserve national champions in 1987, 91, 93, 95. He was named the Coach of the Year by the Intercollegiate Coaches Association in 1991 and 92 and continues to be in demand as a cattle show judge from Canada to Texas and everywhere in between. He's served for the last several years as the head of Department of Animal Sciences at Oklahoma State University, Dr. Clint Rusk, and he spoke about the changing conformation of cattle over the years. But first of all, Clint, let us know kind of your path that took you now to Oklahoma State.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be with you. I had a good fortune to grow up in the hills, in the Gyp Hills of Kansas, down between Medicine Lodge and Coldwater, with a registered Hereford cattle background, and eventually registered Angus cattle. I went to Colby Community College on a presidential scholarship and met my wife there, the lady that would become my wife, and we both went to school at Kansas State then after we finished at Colby. I was on a very competitive judging team at Kansas State and met lots of great professors and really attribute my education to what I received there in Manhattan. My wife and I, after we were married in 1980, went back to the ranch where I grew up and spent about 5 years raising cattle, and we started our family in 1985, and it was really a challenging time to make a living in the cattle business. We had the opportunity in 85 to go to Colorado State University and manage their cow herd and to start work on a master's and a PhD program, which I finished, and while I was there also coached the livestock judging team. Our first job after I received my PhD was at Purdue University in Indiana, and I served as the youth livestock specialist for 13 years at Purdue and really planned to retire doing that job. I really enjoyed that, but had a former student who went to South Dakota State University, became a meat scientist, and she called and asked me if I would apply for their department head position. And eventually I did do that and was offered the position there, and I spent 3 years in Brookings, my wife and I, in Brookings, South Dakota, and fell in love with a whole new area of the country and one that we hadn't experienced. Areas with some wonderful livestock people and a very good school. 3 years after we went there, I had the opportunity to apply at Oklahoma State University as a department head, and we're now starting on our 6th year at Oklahoma State and enjoying that, and certainly a pleasure today to be back in Kansas, as it always is, to come back and see so many people that I knew growing up and others that knew my family. So really enjoyed the Kansas Cattle Drive today.
And it's been great to have you back, and you were brought in part to speak to those attending the cattle drive about live animal evaluation, cattle evaluation, and how that has ebbed and flowed over the years. It's more or less like a tide that rises and lowers, it would seem, because we can't do it here through radio, but as you illustrated, the type of cattle has really shifted over time.
That's certainly true, and I wasn't alive during that time, but in even the 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s, the pictures of the cattle that were shown and that were successful during those times, I think, are very much in vogue today. I think really big-bodied, easy fleshing, low-maintenance type cattle that had extra body and were more three-dimensional. And then as we went through times, and of course times changed and then demands changed, but the cattle that were raised in the 40s and 50s, back when my granddad was raising cattle, became extremely small and early maturing, and cattle that finished at a very light weight. We then went into the 70s and 80s, and the frame size came back up again, and we went through a period in the early 80s where cattle we selected cattle that were extremely large. And I remember in Denver when cattle that were a frame 10 would beat cattle that were a frame 9, and probably both were too big. And now we've come back to cattle that are more moderate, more practical, more, in my opinion, more economical, frame 5 and 6 cattle that still produce the kind of cattle for the feed yard and for the packers that they appreciate. And I think we've really done a good job of improving the performance and yet the efficiency of beef cattle.
So then do you see the genotype settling into this equilibrium, as you just described it, where it's going to be more functional in terms of responding not only to producers' needs to put beef on the hoof, but the consumer desire for specific beef quality?
It's hard to predict for sure how things will go, but they say history will repeat itself. It's hard to think that we would go back to the really small cattle or the really tall cattle that we've had in the last however many years, but it would seem that the economics would drive the cattle that are being successful now and the cattle that folks are raising, the majority of them in that moderate frame size, I think at least fit the industry really well. But where we'll go in the future just depends on how well we learned from the past, probably.
You also, Clint, spoke about the state of the industry in general and where we're at, noting the dry conditions we see throughout the Central Plains. That is of an immediate concern. What, as you look at the industry ahead, do you think the producer needs to focus on in staying in business, being economical about it?
Well, I think, as I travel around the world, and it didn't get an opportunity to do that until more recently, but had an opportunity to travel to Ireland. I've spent 2 different trips and getting ready for a 3rd trip to New Zealand, and areas where there's an abundance of rainfall, and those folks utilize forage to a high degree, not only to grow their cattle, but to fatten their cattle. And so we know that there are places that can do that. Certainly here in the United States, our rainfall ebbs and flows, and right now we've been short on rainfall again for an extended period of time. So it's hard to say that we're going to move to more of a forage-based system for beef cattle, but yet, as a ruminant animal, they can certainly utilize forage and other sources of feedstuffs that we can't utilize as humans, we can't utilize to feed swine. And so I think there's no question that we're going to continue to utilize forage, and that the more of a forage-based economy that we can move to with our cattle, I think we can take advantage of the efficiency, natural efficiency that a ruminant animal has.
Now this sways outside of the realm of animal science, but in the agronomy field, cover crops, for instance, have come on. And you speak of forages and more reliance on forages. Is that an opportunity that's knocking?
I think absolutely. I think we saw some of that when I was in South Dakota, and the utilization of cover crops and crops that maybe we hadn't thought of when I was a kid growing up, and especially in the Flint Hills and Gyp Hills of Kansas. But certainly those cover crops, anytime we can grow forages that we can get livestock to consume, we know that we're not just feeding the animal, we're really feeding the microorganisms in the rumen, and the rumen microflora can certainly digest some really what we would consider low-quality feedstuffs. If we can get the animals to consume them, the rumen microflora can do really well on those.
Clint, you are the head of the Animal Sciences Department at Oklahoma State University. In a broad sense, when you look at the beef cattle research that OSU is focusing on now, what would be those 2 or 3 lead points of emphasis?
Well, we've done a lot of wheat pasture research at Oklahoma State, and that will continue. This is one of the first years we've had where it looks like we're going to have to sell the cattle off the wheat earlier than normal. but we've done research on wheat pasture for years and trying to find those varieties of wheat that we can get both a gain and a grain program from, where we can utilize cattle to graze that forage until a certain stage and then still harvest a crop. So we're going to continue to work in that area, trying to find better and better varieties of wheat. We have some of the best wheat breeders in the country there working at Oklahoma State. And then on the cattle side, we're certainly looking and studying more about efficiency of cattle production, trying to find those body types and that proper level between cow size and milk production that is the most economical in our part of the country. And we're finding better and better equipment to do that, better ways to study that. We're also looking for ways to study efficiency of gain on grass. And so new equipment, we're using a green feed system developed in the Dakotas and trying to be able to measure more efficiency of not only the cows but also stocker cattle in a grass environment.
Lots of innovative ideas out there, and it sounds like, in general, you think that the cattle industry is in pretty good shape right now, all told.
Well, and I don't think there's any question, those of you listening here in the state of Kansas, some of the really top cattle producers and cattle feeders and stocker producers are right here in the state of Kansas and in Oklahoma, in this area of the United States. And some of the really, really good minds and people that are really talented, and they're innovative. They're willing to use new technology, and they're willing to put it to work.
Good to have you back in Kansas, close to the old stomping grounds, and we appreciate your comments at the Cattle Drive, Clint. Thank you very much, and the best of luck as you forward your assignment at Oklahoma State University.
Thanks, Eric. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today.
And he is a native Kansan, originally from Barber County. Once more, he is now the head of the Animal Sciences Department at Oklahoma State. Dr. Clint Rusk, and he talked about live animal evaluation then, now, and in the future, among other topics, at the Kansas Cattle Drive, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension and the Reno County Cattlemen's Association, this past Saturday in Buhler. Now we'll break away for these next few moments here on the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Agriculture Today continues over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. For this week's Kansas 4-H segment, we'll learn more about the horse and horseless horse projects and meet the State 4-H Horse Volunteer of the Year. The Kansas 4-H Horse Project offers 4-H members an opportunity to learn, handle, care for, and ride horses. The Horseless Horse Members Project does not involve owning or leasing a horse, and there's no riding. However, they do participate in a number of activities. Volunteers play a vital role in the success of both of these projects. And K-State 4-H specialist Pam van Horn says they recently announced the State 4-H Horse Volunteer of the Year.
We just completed our 4-H Horse Panorama at the end of January, and with that, we named our State Horse Volunteer of the Year. And it's an exciting time because we spotlight a volunteer who has dedicated a lot of time to the 4-H horse program.
And this year it was Jean Huntley from Edwards County.
That is correct. Jean Huntley from Edwards County was nominated from her people, and she was selected as the winner. And this is the fourth time we have done this honor across the state. And it is an honor that has been available through the generosity of Bronk and Todd Barrows in the name of their father, who had passed away about 5 years ago.
And what are some of the things that you're looking for in this Volunteer of the Year?
The volunteer application as it is a resume, and then we're wanting letters of recommendation from another volunteer, the county extension agent, and a youth. So it's how they have worked with the 4-H county program locally and maybe even beyond the county borders. But it's the excitement that they've brought together with the learning atmosphere for those young people.
And we actually have a chance to visit with Jean today as well. Jean, welcome into the conversation.
Thank you.
Give me a little background on your experience in Edwards County.
I have been a horse leader in Edwards County since I was 19 years old, and I have thoroughly enjoyed horses, and the youth of our state is even more important than my love for horses. I got involved with a very dear friend whose name was Lindell Adams, and she taught me a lot, and we sponsored the horse show here in Edwards County for 23 years, I think. And then I got to where I volunteered at the Southwest District Show. I thoroughly enjoy meeting the kids from across the Southwest area. And then when Ann Domsch was the state 4-H horse leader in Manhattan, I got started working at the State Fair Horse Show. So I've done that a number of years too. My favorite part of that is working the check-in desk, because I get to meet the kids and wish them good luck and try and meet them with a smile and encourage them to do their best but have fun. So,
sounds like you have a lot of experience along this, and especially a lot of volunteering experience.
Yeah. It's something that's very vital to Extension and to 4-H, and I'm a very firm believer. I'm very passionate about the 4-H program across Kansas.
What are some of the things that you do specifically with the youth in Edwards County?
I'm actually the office professional here at Edwards County K-State Research and Extension, and so I help with the 4-H program. I do our local 4-H newsletter once a month. I interact with the kids on project basis, help with county 4-H days, the county fair, of course, and state fair. Another thing I do for the horse project is I write the Kids and Horses newsletter that goes out monthly. Have done that for a number of years too. It's educational and informative, and just a way for the kids to learn more about their horse project.
Sounds like you're very involved with the overall project. You have an opportunity then to really get to know some of these kids?
Oh, yes. I love the one-on-one contact. Like I said, working at the district show and the state fair, I really have gotten to know the kids. And, in fact, I'm working on second-generation kids. I have parents who come up to me and say, I showed when I was in 4-H, and it's really good to see that you're still involved. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that I get to know the second generation of those kids and that they're carrying on through their family in that tradition.
And Pam, this is really what we like to see across the state, is this kind of volunteer involvement.
Oh, yes. You know, there's times I lean on those horse volunteers that are on my 4-H horse action team because they're knowledgeable and they get the feet on the ground. Jean's just been wonderful. She does the registration desk at the state fair and she greets all the participants. Very reliable in what she does, and I just appreciate all the volunteers that step up and provide for our 4-H members across the state.
Well, and as she mentioned, some of these people are seeing second-generation 4-Hers now, and that's really how this program continues to grow, is through these volunteer efforts.
Oh, it certainly does. The volunteers can ignite a fire within a young person, and many times we talk about that caring adult. And sometimes that caring adult, if it's outside of the family, can really spark the young person to learn more.
And it sounds like, Jean, you're kind of one of those that helps keep these 4-Hers on track. You keep them up to date on what needs to be done.
I hope so. It is one of my goals, to keep the project fun and interesting and to keep them involved. I think 4-H is a very vital part of our nation today.
Well, we certainly congratulate you on your 4-H Horse Volunteer of the Year. Sounds like a well-deserved recognition.
Oh, thank you. I'm truly honored and humbled by receiving this award. I'm pretty much a behind-the-scenes sort of person, so this has been a little hard for me to accept this, but I am very honored by it. So.
Sometimes you have to come out from the shadows and take the spotlight, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Pam, if somebody needs more information about the horse program, where can they find all of that information?
They can first go to their local extension office and ask the county agent there, or you can go to the 4-H Kansas webpage, which can be found at kansas4h.org. It's a great opportunity to open doors.
That's K-State 4-H Specialist Pam van Horn and the State 4-H Horse Volunteer of the Year, Gene Huntley of Edwards County. Gene received a personalized plaque and a $50 cash award to be donated to a local 4-H club, event, or activity of her choice. If you'd like to learn more about the Kansas 4-H Horse Project, contact your local extension office or go to kansas4h.org/projects and click on the Animals tab, then the Horse tab. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.